So you want to title these notes Populations. This is going over Chapter 8. Yes, all of Chapter 8. This is going to take you a while. I realize these are very long notes. I apologize, but this is a massive section. What I'm going to do is have you guys take the notes, and then after it's due, we will review it in class, so you need these for the game. All right, so the first thing we're looking at populations, human population growth. When we have good supply, demand, when we take care of our land, we will have a longer lifespan. Make sure you write that sentence down. Moving on. Infant mortality rate, along with life expectancy. This will determine how the population is growing. So, if we have infant mortality low, this meaning that within the first year of life, the babies will live past that year. So no sudden infant death syndrome or any other complications. No stillbirths, anything like that. It'll live beyond the year. And when life expectancy is high, what actually high means, it depends on comparing it to previous years. So our life expectancy right now is considered high because it's in the 80s, to where previously it was in the 70s. All right, you need to make sure you know these definitions. Infant mortality, you need to make sure you know what that is. They'll usually express the number out of 1,000. So when you see some low number, you have to realize that that means it's out of 1,000. Life expectancy, the average number of years the person is expected to live. This is taking in all accounts of the human nature within that population. So the American's life expectancy is different than India's life expectancy because we live differently. Our culture is different. You know, we eat more processed foods over here and things like that. All right, turning slides. Looking at the trends, like I said, comparing with India. They all vary based on how we live, technology, how we use the environment, the houses that we're living, the chemicals that we use, that all varies within the region. Again, make sure you write down the red. I think I forgot to say that at the beginning, but I think it's assumed now. All right. Definitions: population size, number of people, population density, the number of people in an area. So yes, okay, you might only have 3 people, but the number of people given in a certain area may only be 1. Population distribution is how it's looking throughout an area. Is it more condensed in one area, or is it more spread out in one area? You need to make sure you know the difference between these 3. This is a graph looking at the trends throughout the year. So we are about here right now, and we are at 7 billion. So if we keep going on the same curve, it will look like that. But generally, this curve is underestimating, so it'll probably end up going like this, to be totally honest with you. We're going at a much, much faster rate than the Census Bureau usually says. All right, fertility rate. You need to make sure you know these definitions. So there's actually, when you're looking at fertility rate, you're looking at the possibility of children and how many children they actually have. So total fertility rate is the average number of children a female will actually have during their lifetime. So the average in America is 3. And I think it's like 2.5 actually, because of the way it averages. Replacement fertility is the total fertility rate for a nation that would keep its population stable. So what that means is the total fertility that we would need to keep the population stable. It's not going to be 2.5 for America because it's growing really fast. We have very little deaths and people are living a lot longer. So our total fertility in America would be about 2.5, but replacement fertility rate would probably be about 1, if that, because we're living a lot longer and there's a lot less deaths. We are birthing more than we are dying. Okay, age structure diagrams. These are really popular. We're going to be studying these. We're going to be looking at different comparisons. A lot of times they'll do male and female. So what it is, it's looking at the relative number in the age brackets within a specific population. So we are looking at the U.S. in 2010 from 0 to 100 years. for male and female. You have to make sure that you look at this data before you just start analyzing the graph. What country is it? What date is it? Is it looking at male and female? And what's the age brackets? Because sometimes they might only do the 20s or the 30s to identify what's going on within that bracket. So you can see our numbers start to taper off between the 60s. They're really quite even from the 50s from 0 to 4. And that's showing us that in 2010 we had a really good growth rate and that we were very stable within, if you lived within these years. All right, change slides. This is looking at the or the difference in population size according to sex, so the sex ratio. Again, look at the information you're looking at. We are looking at China in 1990 versus 2010, so a 20-year span in between. So you have to realize there's 20 years in between these two, and we'll compare them a lot. Going from 0 to 100 years. We have males on the left and females on the right. So if we take a look at this, you can see in 2010, the population was at about 40 and 35. But here, if you look, it's like 65 and 60. So if something happened in 2010, this number for 0 to 4-year-olds is a lot lower. 40 to 45, it's huge here, but in 1990 it was really low. So something dramatic happened in that 20-year age gap, and people will look at this and analyze and try and figure out why. I mean, just look at this trend here. From 49, it's a much different triangle. When you shape it like that, you can really see how it changes and how it flexes. And we'll look at that. We'll compare the different graphs and try and figure out what happened to the population in that time. All right, so demographic transition. It basically means as the population is changing with the technology and the culture, how the population size changes. So if you're looking at a pre-industrial stage, before industry, birth rates and death rates are both high. There's going to be a lot of births, but there's always going to be a lot of deaths, so it'll equal out. A transitional stage, you're going to have the birth rates high, but the death rates are declining, so your population will start increasing. Birth rates are high, and there'll be less death. Industrial stage, birth rates start to go down, and death rates are going to stay low. So your population from this point to this point is going to decrease because the birth rates are going to start to go down because everyone's stabilizing out. They're not having as many kids. They're doing more cultural things. They're going to college and not just staying home type of thing. Post-industrial stage, birth rates and death rates fall to a low and stable levels. That's when the system is going to level out, and we can tell the post-industrial compared to the pre-industrial because of the lifestyles that they're leading. Yes, they're both equal, but you're not having it be equal because of that many deaths. You're having it be stable because we're living well and we're not having that many births. So you do have to look at both sets of data. You can't just look at what they equal out to. You need to make sure you know these definitions. This is a definition-heavy chapter. I know we haven't had one yet, so it's a little strange. All right, so difference between developing nations and developed nations. Developing nations, you need to know this difference. You've got to memorize these. They're going to have higher fertility, infant mortality, and death rates, so the population will be decreasing. Lower life expectancy, so usually, below like 50. And then per capita resource use, that means that for their lifestyle, they're not using as many resources. So, I mean, look at how many resources are used to build this house compared to this house. There's going to be a lot more plastics and woods and glass to use this house than this one. I mean, I don't even think there's any glass in that house. So developing nations will actually use less economic or environmental resources. Developed nations, lower fertility, infant mortality, and death rates. They're all low, so the population will increase. Higher life expectancy, so usually 70 and up. Higher per capita resource use. They usually say one person in a developed nation is like 8 people in a developing nation. So it's a 1 to 8 ratio. something crazy like that, because of how many resources we end up using just to live our daily lives. All right, this is the 8.3 section. So when we're looking at how this impacts our environment, like I said before, poorer societies, developing nations, will have smaller footprints than our nations, because we're using a lot more resources. Using your toaster costs more energy than running your laptop for 2 days. So it's, they're not using electricity, they're not using energy in a lot of developing nations. All right, the wealth gap. This is another vocab word. Currently, the richest 20% use the world's 86% of the resources. That's correct. Only 20% of the nation use about 86% of the resources on Earth. It's amazing how much we use. One movie is People Bomb. I don't know if we're going to be able to watch it, but it is honestly the clue as to how developing and developed nations actually end up living together. All right, impacts on technology. Again, there's negative impacts where we have a lot more pollution, we have a lot more waste, it's causing climate changes. The positive impacts is that we can live healthier, more comfortable lives. It helps to make us sustainable, because we can have technology to have recycling and use renewable energy. So there's that point where, yes, we are using a lot of resources, but we have to come back and we have to use all of our technology in order to combat that. All right, so those are the notes. You need to make sure that you at least go back and try and write all of them. I know they're really long. I'm sorry, guys. But you need to make sure that you look at them. This is a big, big chapter test, and we will go over them in class. We will try and do a lot of activities. This is going to take us probably past the grading period. Report cards go out on October 11th.